Well, you mentioned that I was recently inducted into the state of Michigan uh, uh, Veterans Hall of Fame and or Hall of Honor, as they really call it that, but they call it Hall of Fame too. And that's because I'm from Michigan, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, from a large family, fifth child, third son out of 10. We had a pretty big family. Grew up in inner city Detroit, and as the case in growing up in the late 50s and the 60s and so forth, it was a very different time then, particularly with the fact that how the social culture was, particularly as it related to a young African American as myself, and to be put into situations where oftentimes that I was always told as a child of what I could be and what I couldn't be, mostly because of the color of my skin, and this occurred not just from whites, but from even my fellow Black Americans, because of the way how the culture was. There is no way you can do these kinds of things because it just isn't going to be that way. And it was just kind of a strange upbringing at that time. But I watched my oldest brother, who's 8 years older than I am, that sort of started breaking the mold. He started doing all kinds of things that I say even to this day he remains as my mentor, my best mentor that I've ever had. He went into Boy Scouts, became an Eagle Scout. I wanted to be an Eagle Scout. He went to back then, although today they call them magnet schools or schools of higher learning compared to other public schools. He got into one of those schools, and I wanted to go to one of those schools. So that meant I had to do well in school. I had to get my grades up. But he was my motivation that helped me to do those kinds of things. So anyway, when he graduated from high school at the age of 18, and I'm 10 years old at the time, actually not quite 10 years old at the time, he chose the opportunity to go into the Navy. And the reason why, because of a large family, he wanted to go to college. And there was just no way my family was going to be able to afford him going to college. He did get a couple of scholarship offers, but it just was not enough to feel that he was going to be able to go to college and work at the same time. So he decided to go in the military. He decided to go into the Navy. And he chose the Navy specifically because, Vietnam War was just starting up, and, he wasn't quite interested in wanting to go dig in dirts and things like that. But he was excited about what the Navy was all about. So he went into the Navy and actually did exceptionally well during his time in the Navy. He rose through the ranks. Navy sent him to college. He went to Officer Candidate School. In fact, he retired as a captain in 06 after 30 years of service in the Navy. So as I'm watching his career, being that we're 8 years apart, I'm really being a part of it and seeing things, how it was working for him. So guess what I wanted to do? I wanted to be just like my brother. What Brother Greg did, I was going to follow. And that included I was going to go into the Navy. I was going to work my way and go to college while I was in the Navy, and I was going to be just like him. I'm not so sure if I ever thought I wanted to be Master Chief of the Navy at that time, but I certainly wanted to do whatever my brother Greg did. So that's all I wanted to do. And so, like I said, from age 10 to actually age 17, when I became a senior in high school, that's all I talked about. That's all I wanted to do. My bedroom was plastered with Go Navy, Fly Navy. The statutes of limitations have run out, so I could admit that I stole a bunch of signs in front of the recruiting offices about the Navy and put them up there. But that's all. And everybody knew I was going to the Navy. I mean, when I was 14, when I was 15, everybody knew I was going in the Navy. When I was in the Boy Scouts and I was also in the Sea Cadet program, they all knew I was going into the Navy. So on my 17th birthday as a senior in high school, my parents, being that this is all I wanted to do, they gave me the best birthday present that I could have ever wanted. That they were going to sign to allow me to go into the delayed enlistment program, which means if you're a senior in high school and you're at least 17 years old and your parents signed for you can enlist. And then after you finish high school, off to the service you go. So that's what I was going to do. So I was excited when I knew that was going to happen. So the day after my 17th birthday, because my birthday fell on a Sunday, that Monday after I got out of school, I ran down to the federal building in downtown Detroit, Michigan. And there was a long, narrow hallway where all the recruiters were. And I saw this guy in a Navy uniform, blue Navy uniform, at his desk on a telephone. And I made a beeline for that office to go sign up for the Navy. Now, my father went down to the Navy recruiting office that Friday, got all the paperwork, told the Navy recruiters that I was coming in on Monday, and said, listen, you don't have to tell this kid anything about the Navy. He knows more about the Navy than you will ever know. And I did, because there were something like 450 ships in the Navy back then. I memorized the name of every one of them. You gave me the whole number of a ship. I could tell you what kind of ship it was. Wow. I could tell you where it was home ported. I could tell you how many people were on it. I knew everything about the Navy. And anyway, long story short is all I had to do was go in, fill out the paperwork, set up for physical, and I was in. I even took my test because I was in the Sea Cadet program. I was allowed to take my my battery test, which qualifies you to go into the Navy. I had already done that, so I didn't have to do anything except go in and fill out the paperwork and schedule for my physical, and that was it. So anyway, I go into the recruiting office, and the recruiter is on the phone. He says, have a seat. I'll be right with you. And just before I get ready to sit down, I look at the pictures on the wall. And, Navy ships are gray. Well, these ships were all white. And they said Coast Guard. I walked into the wrong recruiting office. See, back then, the Coast Guard uniform was exactly the same as the Navy uniform, with the exception of the hats. And then on the right sleeve, there was a shield, which the Coast Guard still has today. But I didn't pay attention to the guy's shield on his right sleeve. I just saw him in a blue Navy uniform, and that was it. I didn't even look at the door. The door said Coast Guard as big as day. I just zeroed in on that guy in his blue crackerjack Navy uniform, and that was it. So I'm in the wrong recruiting office. I'm embarrassed. I'm one day over 17. I didn't want him to think I could make that kind of mistake. So I decided I wasn't going to walk out. I was going to wait till he get off the phone and then talk to me, and then I'll go find a Navy recruiter. So while he's on the phone and he's talking to somebody, I nervously walk around the office and I start looking at the pictures on the wall. And they were some very exciting pictures. A picture of a Coast Guard rescue boat pretty much dancing out of the water. I mean, really just popping right out of the water. And that was pretty cool. And then there was a picture of a Coast Guard icebreaker in the South Pole and a penguin standing next to the breaker. And that's pretty cool. I'm looking at all this. And then there's just all kinds of just real exciting, adventurous pictures about the Coast Guard. And then I come across a unit citation, which when someone at a unit, an entire unit does very well, everyone gets an award. It's called a unit commendation. So one of the recruiters in that office received a unit commendation, and the citation was hanging up. So I started reading it, and it read like a novel. It was a rescue that this recruiter who was stationed on the particular ship that was involved in the rescue was in. And in fact, Disney made a movie out of it. It's called The Finest Hours, which was a story of the motor vessel Pendleton and the motor vessel Fort Mercer. This happened in the 50s that were involved in a nor'easter. And again, it turned out to be one of the greatest rescues of all time for the Coast Guard. So after reading that, I looked at it and I said, wow. So when I said, wow, the recruiter stopped his call, looked up at me, and he said, I guarantee you'll have one of those in your first 4 years in the Coast Guard. And that's it. that's how I ended up in the Coast Guard.
Oh, the poor Navy. Poor Navy lost out, huh? Big time.